I now recognize Congressman Mills for your lines of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you to our distinguished guests for coming here today. I wanted to kind of just point out some of the obvious statements here. The Director of Defense Trade Controls of the U.S. State Department has continued to be one of the biggest issues with holding up approvals that are necessary not only for programs of record, but also for new programs for us to be able to start up for our partners. And looking at the geopolitical relationships and the alliances of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, it's now more important than ever for us to look at our bilateral, trilateral, and even the Quad as agreements that we can try and work at in a more nimble but also an expedited fashion. If any of you had any suggestions on programmatic and procurement reform, what would that look like?
Congressman, if I may, just immediately, the question is about the programmatic reform. I'll refer you to something that I put in the statement to assist the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls with that assistance. Many of the companies that we represent, as well as the companies that are at this table, this is an administrative answer. They are responsible for applying for export licenses and the processing of those export licenses using an antiquated IT system that is an interagency IT system. So that IT system has not been upgraded in 20 years. And I can tell you from the experience of these
Although according to them, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, the DDTC response hotline is the new reform, right? As of a couple of years ago, you can now check on your program that's being stalled within its actual programs, but that was their way of saying that we're improving our system by adding a hotline to it. So we know how antiquated and how out of date it truly is.
I would encourage the committee to look at the last couple of years. There has been some outages in the licensing system of requiring the hand carrying of licenses between the departments. And certainly as we are trying to operate at speed and at scale, that's an unsustainable situation, especially if we have a number of licenses going through where the ITAR exemption is not appropriately scoped.
Well, I can tell you that one of the things that I truly want to look at is the exemptions, especially when it comes to Australia and the UK, where we're going to be needing those more than ever should there be an attempt for a China unification or have we an Indo-PACOM fight that we're going to have to respond to in a rapid fashion. Knowing that DDTC and the director there, the person who's responsible for Civ Milpol, is a political appointment, do you think that would be better served as a career position as opposed to a political appointment?
I don't know whether or not the political aspect of it or the career aspect of it would make a major difference in the way the oversight is done of that particular process. I think it's important to note that the men and women that do the licensing both within the State Department and the other agencies, DOD and elsewhere, they have a tough job. And there's a lot of licenses that are coming into the system, even with a reduction in total number of licenses that are coming in now. I think there's more that can be done to expedite that review. I would suggest that we need to be thinking about doing less with less, not more with less, to the extent that a lot of those licenses, particularly those that are going to our strategic allies and partners, we really need to be considering mechanisms like the AUKUS exemption to help break down sort of the routine that no longer needs to be done in that process.
I completely agree. And I'll say that the DSP-5, the DSP-83, for those that are utilizing certain types of energetics, for example, in my previous company, we used a lot of A5s, M2, CH6, things like this, where it required additional support. Then you had to go through the ATF in addition to the State Department, in addition to the DOD, in addition to if it was over 50 million come to Congress. So it was a very cumbersome program. And when you're talking about the speed and evolution of warfare, especially as we're seeing today, that process cannot match and meet the requirements for us to be able to try and not only support a sustained fight for ourselves if need be, but also for our allies. And so I agree that the process needs to be streamlined in a more concise way. And I think that some of it in all entirety could have gone to the Commerce as opposed to staying within the State Department, which would have also simplified things. And I see you shaking your head yes, so I assume that we're all kind of on the same lines of this. For kind of my final statement on this, Australia has played such a major role, and I don't think that people understand when it comes to energetics, companies like Dales and what they've been able to do for us. There's only one company in the entire United States, which is BAE Holston, who even makes A5, knowing that's a key component of our mortar systems, our 40 millimeter, as well as for our 155 artillery shells. Do you feel that a exemption that would essentially stop the kind of cumbersome process would also enable the U.S. to increase its capabilities to build 155 at a higher production rate?
So, Congressman, on energetics in specific, I would count a story I heard that I had from a U.S. DoD official, and it went like this. It was interesting to see when we provided the industry the funding that they needed to develop energetics, how quickly the industry was activated to meet that need. The demand signal that we talk about a lot in industry, the demand signal that is needed is funding and contracting in order to meet that need. There is no other better way to activate the industrial base than providing the funding and then activating many of the OEMs that then flow down to the supply chain to activate those companies as well. Having some additional licensing throughput certainly is necessary, but ultimately, if we want to develop energetics in this country, we need funding into the industrial base to develop that industrial base.
Well, I really appreciate all the answers we had today, and I understand the struggles, especially as we had gone to the LCTA, kind of low-cost, technically acceptable bids that didn't reflect the comp ranges for the 20%, nor the 52.102 FAR regulations of free and open competition. So there's many competing regulations that we have to deal with and combat as well. But it is the private sector that should be driving these policies. It is not the government and our capacity who should be driving the private sector. And I fully embrace the idea that we need to work in a more unified way to coalesce around what is the best plan and strategy for us in the future. So thank you for the tireless efforts. Thank you for being the actual job creators, not the federal government. And thanks for going through these long processes where before BAFO, it may take you 2, 3, and 4 years where you're having to take massive expenditures up front, where you're having to maintain key staff up front that may not be on a program, and taking the financial burden on behalf of the slow and cumbersome process of government. With that, I